Welcome back. Tonight we have 3 stories, and the thread running through all of them is the same quiet dread. The feeling that something already knows you, already knows your house, your family, your name, before you ever knew it was there. We'll move from a dark rural road to an old house in the mountains with a room that shouldn't exist. And we'll close with Liam Lowe in a story about his younger brother's imaginary friend. And the night the vent talked back. Let's begin. This story is brought to you by Delacroix. It was a Wednesday night in late November 2021, and I was 3 hours into a rideshare shift on the rural outskirts of Baton Rouge when a ping came in from an address I almost didn't accept. The app showed a pin dropped on a gravel road about 11 miles outside the city. No cross street, no business name. When I switched over to satellite view, all I could make out was a tree line and what looked like a dirt path cutting through a field. It was close to 1 a.m. The surge pricing was decent. I told myself it was probably a farm worker, somebody heading back into the city after a late shift of their own. I accepted the ride. The drive out took about 15 minutes. The road names started getting longer and less familiar the further I went. The last 2 miles had no streetlights at all, just my headlights cutting through flat darkness and rows of trees on either side. When I reached the pin, I pulled onto the gravel shoulder and sat there with my hazards on. There was no house visible. No porch light in the distance. Nothing. Just the field and the tree line and the sound of my engine idling. I was about 30 seconds from canceling when the back door opened. I hadn't seen him approach. 1 second there was nothing in my mirrors, and then the door opened and a man got in. He was maybe mid-40s, dressed in a collared shirt and dark slacks, like he'd just come from a business dinner. He sat down, closed the door quietly, and folded his hands in his lap. He didn't say a destination. He didn't say anything at all for the first couple of minutes. I asked him where he was headed. He gave me an address in mid-city, calm as anything, like this was the most normal ride he'd ever taken. I plugged it in and pulled back onto the road. That's when he said my name. Not just my first name, my full name. Delacroix. He said it the way you'd read it off a form, matter of fact, no inflection. Then he said the name of the street I grew up on in Prairieville. And then he said her name, my ex-girlfriend's name. A woman I hadn't spoken to in almost 2 years and who I never talked about with anyone. Something dropped in my stomach. I kept my eyes on the road and said something like, "The app shows your name and rating, not mine." I was already reaching for a rational explanation. It probably pulled my profile somehow. There's been glitches before. He shook his head, just slightly, and said, "That's not where I got it." Then he mentioned the parking garage, the specific one, the one on 3rd Street where I used to meet her on my lunch breaks when I was still working downtown. He described the level we always parked on. He said it so quietly, so without emphasis that for a second I wasn't sure I'd heard him correctly. I gripped the wheel tighter and hit the door lock without really thinking about it, both front and back. The click of it was loud in the car. He looked at the door panel, and then he looked at me in the rearview mirror, and he smiled. Not a warm smile, just a movement of his mouth. "You don't need to do that," he said. "I already know where you're going after this. You're going to stop at the Shell on Airline, get a coffee, and take the 61 home." You'll be parked in your spot by 2:15. He was right. That was exactly my plan. I hadn't told anyone. It was just a habit. The same loop I'd driven 100 Wednesday nights. I didn't say a word. I kept driving. My mind was running through explanations and landing on nothing. There is no version of a rideshare app that gives a passenger your childhood street address. There is no data breach that explains the parking garage. I was trying to breathe normally and failing. About 4 miles from the gas station I always stopped at, I felt something shift in my chest. Every part of me wanted to be out of that car. I said something about hearing a noise from my rear tire, told him I needed to pull over and check it for 2 seconds. My voice came out steadier than I expected. He didn't respond. I pulled into the shell. The overhead lights were almost violent after that dark road. I put it in park and got out and walked slowly around to the rear passenger tire, crouched down, stared at it like I was actually looking at something. When I came back up, the back door was open. He was already out of the car. He was walking toward the edge of the lot where the light ended. Hands in his pockets, unhurried. He didn't look back. He just kept walking until the dark took him. I stood there next to my car for probably 2 full minutes. A truck pulled in for gas, and the normalcy of it, a guy in a Saints hat swiping his card at the pump, was almost surreal. I got back in, locked the doors, and opened the app. The ride wasn't there. Not completed, not canceled, not in progress. Nothing. No trip record for that pickup address. No name, no payment, no rating prompt. I went back through my history, and the last completed ride was a couple from Gonzales I'd dropped off over an hour before. It was like the whole thing had been cut out of the record. I sat under those gas station lights for a long time before I drove home. I did take the 61. I did park in my spot. I was there by 2:15. I called the rideshare support line the next morning and asked them to check for any technical issues with my account the previous night. Unlogged trips, anything that looked like a glitch. The woman I spoke to said everything looked normal. She didn't know what I was talking about. I thought about filing some kind of report, but I didn't know what I'd say. A man got in my car and knew things about me and then walked into the dark, and the app has no record he existed. That's not a police report. That's something else. I don't know who he was or what he wanted or why he got out when he did instead of waiting to see where I'd go. I've thought about it almost every night since. I've turned over every explanation I can think of. A stalker, a scammer running some kind of long con, somebody testing something. None of them fully fit. He still drives the same routes, but he never accepts a ping from an address that doesn't show a building on the map. And he's never been able to explain how the passenger knew about the thing that happened when Evan was 9 years old. Something about being alone in a moving car at night. It strips away every comfort you thought you had. What Caleb Harper experienced was different. He wasn't moving. He was supposed to be safe inside a locked house, and the locks kept coming undone. This story is brought to you by Caleb Harper. In the summer of 2019, I took a 2-week house-sitting job for a family I barely knew through a mutual friend. Large Victorian property outside of Asheville, North Carolina. The pay was too good to question. The family, The Aldermans, gave me a walkthrough the afternoon before they left. Nice enough people. 2 kids, a dog they were boarding elsewhere, a fridge stocked with enough food to last the month. The husband walked me through the alarm system, showed me where the circuit breaker was, handed me a laminated sheet with emergency contacts and instructions for the plants. The wife was pleasant but distracted, already thinking about the flight. They were out the door by 4 o'clock, and I had the whole place to myself by 4:15. It's a beautiful house, genuinely. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, this wraparound porch that looks out over the tree line. I set my bags up in the guest room on the 2nd floor, walked the perimeter of the property while there was still light, and then came back inside and did what I always do in an unfamiliar place. I did a full walkthrough. Every room on the ground floor, the parlor, the sitting room, the kitchen, the mud room off the east hallway, the study with its heavy oak door. I checked every window latch. Before I went to bed that first night, I locked every interior door on the ground floor. Old habit. The house was big and quiet, and I just felt better knowing everything was closed. I slept fine that first night. No issues. The second night is where it started. I came downstairs around 2 in the morning to get a glass of water. Couldn't sleep. Nothing unusual. The kitchen door was standing open. So was the door at the far end of the side hallway off the entrance. Both of them open, maybe 30 degrees each. Like someone had walked through in a hurry and not bothered to close them. I stood there for a moment in the dark. My first thought was that I'd forgotten to lock them. I'd been tired. I was in an unfamiliar routine. I walked through and locked them both, drank my water, went back to bed. Told myself I'd been more careful going forward. Night 3, same thing. Kitchen door open. I told myself I'd misremembered. By night 4, I knew I hadn't misremembered anything. Every single door I had locked the night before was open by morning. Not just ajar. Open. Every one of them. I stood in the hallway with my coffee and just looked at them, all hanging open in a row like something was airing the place out. That morning, I propped my phone against a stack of books on the hallway shelf and set it to record overnight. Wide angle, pointed at the corridor. I went to bed and I didn't hear anything. When I pulled up the footage the next morning, I sat there and watched 40 minutes of an empty hallway, time-stamped 11:08 p.m. Then the footage jumped, cut clean to 11:09 p.m. But the light through the window was different, lighter, pre-dawn. The doors were open. 40 minutes of the overnight recording were just gone. No glitch, no corruption, no motion blur. The file picked back up at 11:09 like nothing had happened. I watched it 3 times. There was nothing there. Just the gap. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with the lights on and tried to talk myself through rational explanations. Bad app, corrupted save file, memory card running out of space. I almost believed it. But I'd locked those doors at 11 p.m. and checked the recording at 6 a.m. And something in the dark stretch between those 2 numbers didn't want to be seen. The next morning, I decided to walk the ground floor more carefully than I had before. I went down the east hallway past the mudroom, further than I'd been, which I realized was further than the Aldermans had taken me on the walkthrough. The hallway didn't appear on the laminated sheet. At the end of it, there was a large wardrobe pushed flush against the wall. Old, dark wood. The kind of piece that looks like it grew there. I almost turned back. I moved it. Behind the wardrobe was a door, unmarked, no handle, just a latch. It opened inward and the air that came out was stale, like a closet that hadn't been opened in a long time. I reached in and found a pull cord light. The room was small, maybe 10 by 10, no windows. A single wooden chair sat in the center of the room, facing the wall, and pinned to the walls in a careful, even grid, dozens of them, like someone had spent real time getting the spacing right, were children's drawings. Crayon and marker, the way a kid draws people. Figures with round heads and stick arms, houses, trees. Same hand throughout, I think, though I'm not sure. I stepped further in. I looked at the baseboard along the far wall. My name was written there in black marker, Caleb, printed in careful block letters. The ink looked fresh. It wasn't faded, wasn't dusty. It looked like it had been written in the last few days. I left the room. I stood in the hallway. And then I called the husband. He picked up on the second ring. I told him I'd found a room off the east hallway, behind the wardrobe. I told him what was inside. There was a long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was very quiet. He said, "Caleb, I need you to leave the house before it gets dark. Don't go back for your things. Just leave." I started to ask him what he meant, what the room was, whose name that was on the baseboard, but he had already hung up. I grabbed my keys off the kitchen counter, my wallet off the guest room dresser, and I was in my car and down the driveway before I'd fully processed what I was doing. I took one photo of the room before I left. One. Then I got out and I drove to a motel off the highway, and I sat in the parking lot for about an hour before I could think straight. The family paid me in full 2 days later. A wire transfer, no message attached. Every number I had for them went dead within the week. The mutual friend who connected us told me they'd asked her not to give out any more information and that she was sorry. I still have the photo I took of that room. I've looked at it more times than I should have. The drawings are there. The baseboard is there. The room is exactly how I remember it. But in the photo, the chair is facing the door, not the wall, the door, facing outward, like someone sat down to wait after I left. I never heard it move. I didn't touch it. I was in that room for maybe 90 seconds and I had my eyes on it the whole time. I don't have an explanation for that. The Aldermans never offered one. I've stopped expecting them to. I still check the locks every night before bed, usually more than once. A house that opens itself to you is one kind of wrong. Our final story tonight comes from Lowe, and it starts somewhere smaller. A 6-year-old boy, a bedroom floor, and a heating vent his brother should never have leaned down and listened to. This story is brought to you by Lowe. My brother Danny was 6 years old when he started spending every evening crouched on the floor of his bedroom, talking into the heating vent like it was a telephone. We grew up in a ranch-style house outside Muncie, Indiana. Nothing remarkable about it. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a finished basement our dad never finished finishing. The heating system was old. One of those forced air setups where the vents ran along the baseboards and rattled when the furnace kicked on in the fall. Danny's room was at the end of the hall, and his vent was bigger than the others for some reason. wide enough that he could fit his whole face in it if he wanted to, which, being 6, he absolutely did. My parents thought it was cute at first. He told them her name was Mara, that she lived inside the vent, and that she was his best friend. My mom laughed about it with the neighbor. My dad called it a phase. I was 13 at the time, and I thought it was annoying, the way little kid stuff is annoying when you're 13 and you think you're basically an adult. What I remember most about that first winter is the sound of Danny's voice in the evenings. Just this low, steady murmur from the other side of the wall. I'd hear him asking questions, pausing, laughing, answering things. The pauses always made me a little uncomfortable, if I'm honest with myself now, but I didn't think about it at the time. I told myself he was just doing the other voice in his head, the way kids do, acting out both sides of a conversation with a toy or a made-up person. But by the following fall, when Danny was 7, things had shifted in a way I couldn't explain. He stopped going outside, just lost interest in it. Wouldn't ride his bike, wouldn't come to the park. When my mom asked why, he said Mara didn't like it when he was too far away. That should have been the thing that got everyone's attention. Instead, my parents just made him go outside for an hour a day and called it handled. The thing that got my attention was something different. One afternoon, Danny came into my room while I was doing homework and told me, completely casually, that Mara said I shouldn't leave my journal in the bottom drawer of my desk anymore because somebody might find it. I hadn't told anyone I kept a journal. I hadn't told anyone where I kept it. I was 13 years old and it was full of the kind of stuff you'd expect, and the idea that Danny had found it and read it was mortifying enough. But when I asked him if he'd looked through my desk, he just shook his head and said, "I didn't. Mara told me." I checked the journal. Nothing was out of place. I moved it anyway. A few weeks after that, Danny mentioned that Mara said she remembered when my parents almost sold the house 4 years ago. That was a real thing. I barely remembered it myself. I would have been 9, and we'd never talked about it in front of Danny, who'd been 3. When I told my mom what Danny had said, she went quiet for a second, and then said, "Kids pick up on more than you think." I started listening more carefully after that. Not obsessively, just paying attention. The night everything changed was in January. I'd gotten up around 11 to get water, and I noticed the light was still on under Danny's door. I almost knocked, almost just told him to go to sleep. Instead, I stopped in the hallway, and I stood there, and I listened. He was talking to the vent again. His voice was low and serious, the way little kids get when they're imitating grown-ups. I heard him ask, "Can you come out? Like, all the way out?" There was a pause. Then I heard something answer. Not Danny, not the furnace. It was a low sound, wet and close, like something shifting its weight against metal. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, and then it stopped. I stood in that hallway and I did not move for a long time. I opened the door. Danny looked up at me, startled. I grabbed him by the arm, walked him out of his room, and put him in my bed without saying anything. He didn't argue. He looked scared too, though he wouldn't tell me why. I told my parents in the morning. I expected them to brush it off. They didn't. I think something in the way I said it got through to them, or maybe they'd been quietly worried for longer than they'd admitted. My dad called the contractor that week to look at the ductwork. The contractor found that one of the external vent covers on the side of the house, the one corresponding to Danny's room, had been tampered with. The screws were stripped. The cover itself had been removed and replaced, probably more than once. When he ran a camera into the shaft, he found scratch marks on the interior metal, not surface rust scratches, deep ones, going in the same direction, like something had been pulling itself forward. He said they looked old. Some of them, he thought, went back years. My parents told Danny that Mara wasn't real and that no one was allowed to talk to the vents anymore. Danny didn't argue. He stopped mentioning her almost immediately, which in some ways was the most unsettling part of all of it. Like a switch had been flipped. About 3 weeks later, he came and sat on the edge of my bed one evening and told me, very quietly, that Mara had said goodbye. I asked him when. He said the night I pulled him out of his room. He said she told him she'd found a better vent and that she'd be okay. I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't. My parents moved us before the following school year. They said it was for my dad's work, which was partially true. We ended up in a suburb outside Columbus, in a house that was 10 years newer and had a completely different heating system. Nobody said it out loud, but I think we all understood why the move happened when it did. The first cold night in the new house, late October, the heat kicked on for the first time. The vents hummed and the air came up warm, and the whole house made those settling sounds a house makes when it's adjusting to the season. Danny went very quiet. He was sitting at the kitchen table, and I watched him stop mid-sentence and turn his head slowly toward the vent in the corner of the room. He sat like that for almost a full minute. Not scared exactly, more like listening. Then he went back to what he was doing, and nobody said anything. Danny is 15 now, and he doesn't remember any of it. Or he says he doesn't, but he keeps a piece of tape over every heating vent in his bedroom, and he has never once explained why. Thanks for being here tonight. If these stories are what you come here for, subscribing and hitting the bell is the best way to make sure you don't miss the next one. Stay safe out there.